see you're also a seller. You can market. I mean, seriously, it's like speaking is just in you. You know, like there are people that sometimes when you talk to and they're telling you something, you're like, what the hell are they talking about? But it's somehow kind of interesting, you know, to like want to find out more, which is very interesting. But right now, I want us to move from the achievements, because Elevate with Sammy really is a platform where we try to encourage people out there who might feel like, you know, they look at their current surroundings, their current situation, and they feel, oh man, I would never be where Phil is. He went and spoke with the FBI, he got this, he got that, he's done this. I don't think I'll be able to even maybe leave Zimbabwe to go to Australia, or leave wherever in Africa to go outside. So I want us to try and go back to who Phil is and where did Phil come from. If you can take us through that journey of who you are, you know, or who you were before the successful and well-known worldwide Phil Zongo.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty long story there. And as you know, I'm actually writing a second book. So I'm putting the story in a book that will come out maybe in the next few months. And so, you know, I grew up in rural Zimbabwe. I was born and bred in a place called Mondoro, which is communal lands that are tagged about 140 kilometers southwest of Harare. And I grew up in the country. I grew up in poverty. And, you know, I've shared a lot of my snippets of my background on LinkedIn. But, you know, just going back and, you know, I remember I got first pair of shoes when I was 12 years of age. And I was one of 9 kids. And we grew up in poverty. And these are some of the stories that I share to say, you know, sometimes we couldn't even afford a box of matches. So my mother had to send me to nearby homesteads to fetch some coals of fire on a sheet of metal. And sometimes it would get, you know, too hot, and I would drop it down, and then I would start the whole procedure again, you know. So it was, you know, my mother couldn't afford to buy tea. So, you know, she would burn sugar in a plate. When it turns dark brown, she pours water, and then, you know, just the illusion of black tea, and we just drink it. So, you know, I grew up in that kind of lifestyle, but I was very fortunate as well, because my parents had a lot of foresight. So they fought really hard to give each of us, 9 of us, access to basic education. So when I graduated with my grade 7 with the highest marks at my village school, my parents had this kind of act of faith. They took me to a better school, which was located 20 kilometers away from home, which is called Rio Tinto Mondoro, in a growth point called Mbaira. The first months were very hard, because I went to stay with relatives, and that didn't work out. I suffered rejection at a very young age. So my parents had to pull me out of my relative's place. And then my father went to the growth point and found a place for me to rent. And that place really, it's a place that changed me and marked me deeply, because that defines a lot of who I am at the moment. So he found one room, which was part of a 3-roomed dilapidated structure, and the 2 other rooms were shared by 2 of the most prominent prostitutes in the growth point. So I lived there for about 3 years, and there was no running water, there was no electricity, there were no windows, my door was unlockable. I couldn't hinge either side. I needed to lift it and place and then go to bed.
Right.
And yeah, it was maybe the toughest period of my life, because the two other ladies that I lived alongside with, they brought in so many strange men, maybe 2, 3, 4 men each per night. And more often they would end up fighting with those men because they refused to pay, or they paid but they did not pay enough. So sometimes they were beaten, they were kicked in the gut, and they would scream in the middle of the night. It was very confronting, to hear them cry. Sometimes I was scared, one of them would be killed. But something very weird happened, because I went to school and I came back, and when I came back I opened my door, and then I found another 14-year-old boy sitting in my room. Yeah, with a bag. And he had come from even further villages called Pani. His mother came to look for a place, and the landlord said, "You stay with Phil, and you pay $40. Phil pays $40." So he immediately doubled his game. So now I had a roommate. So first I was kind of angry that how could he superimpose a roommate on me without even my father's knowledge. But like I said, like I write in my book, that was teach my friend was like, that was the grace of God, because I was so much scared of staying in that place, and Teach's presence really neutered a lot of my fears. And then we became friends, and we lived that life for 3 years. Friday nights I used to run back home 23 kilometers and run back Monday morning. So when we ran back Monday morning, I would wake up really early, like maybe 4 a.m. But it was pretty dark, and I was so scared of the dark. And I never managed to conquer that fear. So my brother, who went to a village school, used to run alongside with me until dawn. So he would run several kilometers alongside me. And then when the sun was about to rise, and then he would run back home. Then he would wash his hands and legs and run to his own village school. So we repeated that cycle for quite a long time. But I was very fortunate, because when I moved into the growth point after the rejection that I suffered from my own relatives, I got a scholarship. So there's a lady called Christine Diel, who is a benevolent German citizen who has traveled to Mondoro for, I think, almost at least 20, 30 years. She traveled there every year. She identified kids who were talented, but they had, disadvantaged backgrounds. And then she went back to Germany and found some sponsors. And then she matched us with with sponsors back in Germany. So she found a sponsor called Marion Bertram, who went on to pay my fees from Form 1 up to Form 4.
Wow.
So that's why I call this the gift of adversity, because living in the place that I lived actually tended to be a big advantage for me, because I hated being at home. So when everyone went back to their homes, I ran back home. I made some dinner, and then I ran back to school, because there was no electricity at home, and my lamp hardly had paraffin. So I ran back to school and I started studying at school, and that became a formidable advantage. So after 4 years, I managed to pass my 9 subjects, and I actually passed with 5 A's and 3 B's and a C. And when I went back to my village with those results, everyone was shocked. They'd never seen anything close to that. So it was a very proud moment. But then it was a pivotal moment as well, because having attained 5 A's at O level, it meant I could get into any public school in Zimbabwe. And I had applied for places, and I got accepted by Goromonzi, which is like one of Zimbabwe's best public schools, and a boarding school for that matter. But I had no money. My parents couldn't pay for me to be a Rio Tinto, let alone paying for my fees at Goromonzi, which was costing almost 10 times higher, about 8 times higher. So I went to my brother. My brother was teaching now in Karoi. And he said, that's fine, I'll find a place for you to become a temporary teacher, and then, you start your own life. But I knew that I could do better than that.
Right.
So, I was very disheartened because, I had no money. So I went back home and I wrote a long letter to Marion in Germany. And, fortunately, she agreed to extend the scholarship for 2 more years and pay for my fees, which was 8 times higher than what she was paying for me. So she took me to Goromonzi, and I was there at Goromonzi. Then managed to pass my A level. I went to MSU. I studied IT, and then went back to Harare, and I was full of hope and anticipation. Then I started working for an organization called Utande Internet Services. As an intern. It was a really good organization. But then, like I said, the economy was starting to tank. There was a lot of pressure as well because people back home thought I was now very rich and I was about to destroy poverty because I was the first one to graduate from university in my family. And now, suddenly, with all hope, 2.5 decades of fighting against poverty, and suddenly I can't pay my own rent, and I can't commute to work, and things were just going south. So that's when I went back to the drawing board again, and then I started applying for jobs overseas. I sent hundreds of applications. I spent the day just applying for jobs overseas, and I got 0 responses. 0. That's when sometimes it was self-awareness. I went back to the drawing board and realized I might not be as good as I think. Back in the village, everyone thinks I'm a genius, I've got a degree, and I can do anything in the world. But, maybe I'm not as good. That's when I went back to the drawing board, and then I realized for me to leave the country, the best thing for me was to pursue the IT auditing course. So started developing websites for people during my free time and during weekends, and raise money. I managed to raise $500 US. So it was a lot of money because by that time I was earning less than $100 US.
Right.
So I managed to raise $500 US. I paid for the exams. I passed the exams. That opened doors for me. I got accepted by PwC and Deloitte. Then I chose to go to Deloitte, and I was there for just less than 2 years. Then I started applying for roles overseas again. Then, because now I was more experienced and I had the qualifications, then I got interviewed. I got interview opportunities with PricewaterhouseCoopers from London, and the other one in Auckland in New Zealand, and one in Sydney in Australia. And Sydney just gave me the role first, and then I politely advised the other offices that I was no longer available. So that's pretty much my story.
Wow.
Really condensed. There's a lot.
Very, very interesting story. I read your book. When I read the book, the first chapter, I was like, I felt so sad. But then, funny enough, I started laughing because it was sad but funny, And I'm just gonna ask about Teach, your friend Teach. Were you guys in the same school?
Yeah, we went to the same school.
Oh, you went to the
but
same
Teach was a year ahead of me.
Oh, okay.
So when I was Form 3, Teach was Form 4, and he was unlike my.
Where is he now?
It's funny because that's a question everyone asks. So
because it's really interesting. When I was reading it, I was like, all those people I would really love. The other thing that was interesting was the SADSA issue. The SADSA issue that you wrote about, that, you know, when you're eating, you stop
Oh, okay.
because of
Yeah,
stop. Yeah. Oh, it was
yeah.
really funny for me. I mean, in as much as it was a sad story, but it was really kind of interesting. You know, you start to visualize
Yeah.
and imagine like what's going on. But I mean, I really love, because when you're saying it, I'm seeing how you persevered, you know, despite everything, you persevered. You told us that you wore your first pair of shoes at 12, right? What was happening before then? Walking barefoot?
Yeah, definitely. Barefoot from
To go
bed to
23 kilometers?
no. So okay,
Oh,
great. So let
primary
me
was
come.
closer. Okay.
Yeah, the primary school was my village school.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
that was closer. That was closer. When I was at Rio Tinto, I was 14 years old then, and that's when I was running the 23Ks, mostly Fridays and Monday mornings. I already had a pair of shoes, and that's what I write in my book as well. But I was running barefoot because, if I ruined my shoes, I didn't know when the next pair was going to come from. So I learned to make responsible choices quite early, because I wanted to wear shoes when I go to school, because that held my self-esteem. I didn't want to be bullied because I didn't have shoes. So, running home, I just took off my shoes and I put them on my shoulder, or, put them in a plastic bag or something like that. But just coming back, let me answer your teach question, because everyone asks where is teach. So teach. Unfortunately, we lost touch. He didn't perform as much as I did with his own levels, he didn't go to A level according to my knowledge. And after we left Rio Tinto, we left the Growth Point. I actually met him once. I just bumped into him in Harare, and I was from Goromonza, I think. And I was dressed in my nice sporting uniform. My self-esteem was much higher then. I was feeling smarter than my village friends. Then I bumped into him, and he was working on a flea market.
Okay.
But he was not really much into, it felt like, he wasn't, he didn't feel proud of where he was.
Oh.
And, our conversation was really basic, wasn't deep. And ever since then, I have never managed to reconnect with him. I've looked for him on Facebook, on social media, but I couldn't find him.
Right.
And I hope he's okay, because he was a friend of mine.
Yeah, he really helped you go through that phase.
Oh, yeah.
Which brings me back to, I mean, when you were there in that room and all these things were happening to you, didn't that affect you in any way on your studies? It seems like you excelled instead of really going down. I mean, staying with such people, all those things happening around you, it didn't even affect you a bit?
It certainly did. And, one key thing, when I say the gift of adversity, and that's a very, very important message that's consistent in my book, because I talk about grit, the ability to persevere towards your goals. And for me, that's been the anchor of whatever I've managed to achieve to date. Even here in Australia, is that ability to push through cynicism and hardship, and just know that the world owes you nothing. It is up to you. Understanding that power of the mindset to say, but the key point here is grit is not a static attribute, and that's the problem that I see all the time. People think that you're doing things because you were born like that. You grow over time. So for me, being in that, school of suffering, or whatever you want to call it, it forced me to grow, so for me, because if Teach went back home, I wasn't running back home every weekend. Some weekends I stayed in the Growth Point.
Right.
So if Teach traveled back to his home, and I was by myself there, and the ladies were, they worked as hairdressers during the day in the salon, and then in the night they went to the pubs, and I was just sitting by myself in the little veranda, and books became my hiding place. So I started devouring a lot of Nigerian pace setters. I read hundreds of them, and because of that, my language skills really sharpened, and my love for narratives, for storytelling, that's when it was ignited, sitting in that veranda and reading books. When other kids were watching Ezomgido and Mukadota and all these other shows, we were only allowed, Teach and myself were only allowed 30 minutes to watch wrestling in the landlord's house every Tuesday night. And I tell people about this because, when we got into the landlord's house, there were two rules. The first rule was we were not supposed to look at his daughters suspiciously. Which was an easy rule anyway, because there were better looking girls at school and not even looking at them. But the second rule was we're supposed to sit on the floor when everyone else was sitting on the couches. And at that time, and life is all about perspective. We never saw that as being unjust, because whenever I tell people they found, because why are you sitting on the cement floor during winter when everyone else is sitting on the couches, and there's so many open unoccupied sofas there, but we were grateful because they were allowing us a rare window of opportunity. So for those 30 minutes every Tuesday night, that became our major source of entertainment. But the point that I'm saying is, at first when I got in there and I lived the life alongside these ladies, it was very confronting. I was gripped with fear, and I write it in my book as well that my fear actually was because there was a lot of promiscuous men who were coming around. There were so many mosquitoes around that place. My biggest fear, if a mosquito bites one of those naughty men and bites me, what if I catch HIV? No, seriously, I was so scared until, a biology teacher or counseling teacher told us that, that possibility it wasn't possible because, so it was, I grew over time. And when I say I graduated with 5 A's and, 9 subjects, it was after 4 years in the Growth Point. My grades increased, they got better gradually. When I started, I was like number 8 in the class out of 10. And when we finished, I was always, around the top 3. So, like I said, that ability to persevere through hardships, for me, it's easy now because, I see people here in Australia complaining that they're not doing things because there's so many excuses. But when I look back at my life and I realize what I managed to push through, that really helps me because one of my, principles that I work with is, I never make excuses. I take full accountability of my goals. If I don't achieve something, it's always the man in the mirror, no one else, not my employer, not my family, no one else, just the man in the mirror. So, that's kind of some of the lessons that I got during my stay. You learn to be grateful for the small things that you have, because there's so many, in as much as I was suffering in the Growth Point, there were so many people back in the village who envied, who died for my situation to go to Rio Tinto Mondoro, So for me, that, I learned to be grateful as well.
So would you say that's what kept you going, to say that, I mean, I've got this, no matter how small it is, but I have something? Will you say that is what kept you going? Because I know that sometimes, when we go through stuff, I mean, we are all human. There's a part where you feel like, I can't take this anymore. There's a breaking point. So yeah, so what kept you like saying, you know what, I'm gonna stay here, I'm gonna finish school, I'm not gonna break? In as much as those men were coming, there was no temptation of like, let me go try to and stuff. But what kept you? Yeah, I mean, it's because sometimes you feel like, what am I gonna lose? Let me just do it. So what kept you like in that zone of like, this is me, this is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to achieve it? What is it?
Yeah, so it's a brilliant question, and I think there's quite a number of factors. Number one is it's just hope. I was always, I think, I'm grateful because I was born with the gift of optimism. Whether that grew over time, I don't know, but I'm always looking for the brighter side. So, where I grew up in the savannah, which is the first chapter of my book, I grew up amongst people I never wanted to become when I grew up. So that by itself pushed me to work beyond the edge of my capabilities, because I never wanted to spend my whole life herding cattle in the savannah, running through storms. I knew that if I get my school right, and this is very important, because when I talk to the people in the first world, I read a lot of articles by psychologists in, Harvard Business Review, and there's a lot of people who are saying grit is overrated. But not where I grew up. Where I grew up, grit is everything, because growing up in the savannah, there was no option B, there was no XO, there was no Morgans, So you either get your school right or you are screwed your entire life. So that was written on the wall, your future was written on the wall. If you mess up with your school, you knew what you were going to become.
Right.
And I never wanted to be one of them, and that was number one. So I was always hopeful and I was always hopeful. The second bit was, the opportunity that I got from Marion Bertram and Christine Diel. Not many people got that opportunity.
Exactly.
And what's important here is, Christine helped so many people across the school, dozens of kids across, many decades. And not everyone, took that seriously. A lot of kids that got scholarships from Christine, they got teenage pregnancies. And I saw this unfold right in my eyes in the growth point. I was 14 years old, I was 15 years old, I was 16, all those, teach temptations, they arise. But like I said before, I learned to make responsible choices. That's why, when I was in Mumbai, I saw people who got scholarships, but they spent time drinking alcohol and chasing girls and smoking tobacco. And, they just became another statistic, wasted potential. And I never wanted to be that. And, that's why, I never drank. And up to now, I've never taken a sip of alcohol.
Wow.
I've got a lot of but I've got a lot of friends who drink, and I hang out with them, and it doesn't make me any better than them, but there's history to it. I had to make those responsible choices, because if I lost the opportunity that Marion and Christine gave me, I would be sitting with you here. So for me, I think those two things, I was just hopeful that there's better life out there. There were not many role models where I grew up, but I just believed that there was something better. And our world was very narrow. When I went to Mumbai, and I was now looking, people back in the village, they were perceiving me as smarter and more sophisticated, because I came back talking about chakras and do these wrestling moves, and But then when I left Yeah, when I left Mumbai and went to Goromonzi, then I realized, oh my God, I was just fooling myself. There's much better life there, because now I was going to class kids of ministers, and they
Right.
were being dropped by Mercedes Benz, and it was a much different life. So I kept believing that there's a better life out there. Even when I graduated, like I said, the status quo has never been my best friend. So I'm always looking to improve myself. So that quest for continuous self-improvement, and just realizing that the opportunity that I got here, oh man, I'm one of 9 kids. I got the best of opportunity of all of them. And my sisters, my brothers they were pretty smart. Some of them were way smarter than me, but I just got this opportunity, so I had to maximize it.
Right. And like you mentioned something of having excuses. There are so many people out there who go through the same things, but they always give excuses like, oh, you know what, at home, why should I graduate? There was no one who graduated in my family. Or why should this happen? There's always that kind of excuse, and we find ways to try and hide instead of aiming to say, okay, I'm gonna try and do this. That belief of, in as much as there's no role model in front of you that you say, I'm gonna be like this one, but you make one yourself. You want to become that role model yourself, and that keeps you drilled up. And now looking at, I know most people who kind of come to this program, basically, they also want to try and learn from the successful people, your journey. Now, what can you tell someone who is in Mondoro right now, who might be also running 25 kilometers to school, who might be in that situation where mom and dad cannot afford? I know back home in Zimbabwe, there's so many kids who actually get chased away from school because there's no school fees. And I read in your book, there's a part where you mentioned that in the morning when you used to stay with your aunt, you would go to the vegetable garden in the morning before school to water the garden. So if there are other kids who might be going through that and they're thinking, you know what, maybe let me just give up, or this is what, some people would say, oh, this is what God wants us to be. And they kind of take it in them to say, this is what I have, this is where I'm going to stay. What can you say to encourage some young people out there?
Oh, yeah. So you raise important points there. The first thing is, the power of the human spirit is incredible. And that's what I learned, running 23 kilometers. I discovered that the more, there's always that X mile within you, don't be knocked down by one punch. You need to rise back again. And life is always full of obstacles. Growing up, I think it all differs, but where we grew up, I think you can relate. There is so much challenges there, but it's very hard to theorize and throw in some theology into this. But all I can say is, if I manage to do it myself, there was no, I was very average in class. Like I said, when I started my Form 1, I was, on the verge of top, on the edge of top 10. I was number 8, number 9. And, just by pushing myself and realizing that there's one more, there's one more mile that I can run. There's, I can push myself. So through definite desire, and just playing the long game. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have in this generation. Like I said, when I graduated, I thought this is the end of poverty. But man, I was I was so naive, because right now I'm still fighting poverty. There's still lots of poverty back where I come from. So you have to play the long game. Real and sustained change takes time. And I think that's the number one thing. For me, it took me about 27 years of working hard every day, me to be able to stand on my own, to earn a salary which I could say, I could do something meaningful with. So you have to play the long game. You have to believe in yourself. Sometimes we get lucky, and there's a saying that we use in golf, that sometimes you get good breaks or bad breaks, but the ball has to be played as it lies.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever situation you're going through, it is up to you. A lot of the things, they are in your mind. You can push through. And this is what I discovered. Look back and I start joining the dots. A lot of things don't make sense then, But for me, this story, I share it with a lot of pride. I don't share the story to get sympathy from anyone.
Right.
I share it with a lot of pride. Yeah, because I was lucky, but I made most of the situations. I traveled back to my former school recently, about 5 months ago, and I spoke to the kids and I told them my story, and the headmaster came to me and said that was so powerful because we never knew that you were bush boarders, kids who come from faraway villages to rent in the Growth Point, because the biggest problem we have now is those kids are engaged in so much promiscuity. They sleep around, they drink, it's so hard to control. So for me to go back and share my story, you need to make those responsible choices. The world owes you nothing. You're going to play the long game, and there's so much in you, much more than you even know yourself. So I think that's pretty much it. If I could do it, you can do it.
Exactly. And those are really wise words. I mean, people always want to take shortcuts these days. We don't want to suffer. Everyone is trying to stop the suffering. But I feel like sometimes going through that pain, really builds you up. And my mom always shared this verse of the potter, like when the pot is the one in the Bible, that when the potter makes the clay, mixes the clay, but you've got that cup, that clay has to go into the fire for it to be strong. There's no way you can be strong without the fire. So you need to get burnt. You need, to go that kneading and all, and at the end you have that perfect cup. So, but the problem is nowadays people don't want to go through the fire. It's like we're always trying to say, how do I jump the fire for me to get to the other side without, but I think from the stories that we've been having this past few weeks, from the speakers that I've been speaking with, I mean, a lot of them, they are very successful by where they've come through. And I'm now getting that sense that my mom used to always give that example of the pot of you have to pass by the fire, and the fire will be strong. Yeah. And looking at this, what you went through, I mean, it really kind of molded you to become the person that you are today, because you've managed to pass through that. Right now, in as much as you now have all these opportunities, there's nothing that is gonna really move you anymore, because you could have been moved back then. Yeah. So these are some of the things that we just want to share with people, to actually say, you know what, sometimes don't be quick to judge yourself. Don't be quick to call yourself a failure. Don't be quick to blame your family, because sometimes you also blame the family, oh, if only my mom could do this, if only this, and don't be quick to do that. Just believe that, I believe that you can be whatever you want to be. Honestly, it's something that I've seen, and from doing this program, I actually now really, really believe that we are so capable of making sound choices. Yeah, because sometimes, we're always kind of quick to say, oh no, that's impossible, it's not gonna happen. But from talking to people now, I'm just saying, you know what, there's nothing called it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna
No,
happen.
no.
If you want it not to happen, it won't. But
I love
if
that.
you want change, actually, you have to really tell yourself, you know what? I'm gonna elevate myself. I'm gonna dust myself up. I'm gonna stand up. This is how it's gonna be, and I'm gonna be there. And I really love your story, Phil, and I appreciate you coming to share with us and taking your time to join us today. I hope it's going to inspire a lot of people out there who are going to read. And by the way, when is your book coming out?
So
Power of Adversity. When are we getting it?
no,
Is it
the
through
gift of adversity.
Yeah. The gift of the gift.
Yes.
Okay. When is it
The
coming
gift of adversity. I would say maybe I have finished the draft. I just talking with publishers now. My aim was, because I turned 40 this year,
out?
and next month actually, and I had my tickets booked. I was traveling to Europe to meet with Marion for the first time, and it was gonna be one of the best times of my life. So Marion and myself, Marion lives in Germany, and she was flying to Italy, and I was flying to Italy, and we're gonna meet at Christine's house and celebrate my 40th. And for me, that was going to be the the first thing, how I was going to end the book.
Wow.
So I was waiting for that opportunity to meet with Marion, someone who made extraordinary sacrifices for my life, to meet here for the first time. And then Corona happened, and then I'm gonna so anyway, it is what it is. I hope to meet with Marion one day, but the book will come out soon.
Wow.
Watch this space.
Oh my God. You know what? This should be a movie, actually. It should be seriously, you have
You
to.
never know.
Seriously, you have to. I'm serious. I read 2 chapters already, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how do people make movies? This one should be a movie. And I'm loving
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Going to find them and stuff. This should be documented, Phil, not on paper. Not on paper. I mean, would really,
Thank you.
I would really love to see how you guys meet. Honestly, I mean, someone who took you to school that you'd never met.
Oh,
and
man.
And now you're 40. I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah. I appreciate every bit. Yeah. Take good care.
Would love to see that. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's been a pleasure and honor to have you. And I bet also when your book is out, we should be the first one also to tell people out there that the
you'll
book
get a signed copy. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Thank you, Sammy.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Take good care and stay safe.
Yes, you too.